what I thought I would do in this presentation is I would just recap basically how property is taxed in New Zealand. Then I'll talk about that in relation to some of the changes that we've seen over the last 18 months. And then now, obviously, we've had a new government come into power, and they have made some promises. Now, every time a politician makes a promise, you've got to take it with a grain of salt. But I do think that some of the things that they have said they're going to do are quite positive for the property market in New Zealand. So if we just start with the general premise of tax, and I know a huge amount of you here would have heard this and be familiar with it, but I think sometimes it doesn't hurt to recap it. In New Zealand, we have an intention-based tax regime. What it pretty much means is that your intention when you purchase a property will dictate how it's taxed. Now, the problem with intention-based regimes is they only exist because we don't have a capital gains tax. We're one of the very few Western countries without a capital gains tax of any sort, and I do think it's probably only a matter of time before we get one. I think the issue with it is that it's a political hot potato, and it's a lot easier for governments to do what we've seen in the last 18 months, which is make intention-based regimes look like capital tax gains tax regimes than it is actually to put them in politically. So what happened in about 2015, well, it was 2015, after a long period of problems in the property market in terms of intention-based regimes, the inland revenue was really struggling because your intention when you purchase a property is not always clear. And people were changing intention, buying and selling properties in short succession. And basically, they were escaping the tax net. And even worse than that, if you're an offshore person, you could come into New Zealand, you could buy a property, you could trade it and leave, and you didn't even need an inland revenue number. So actually, when you think about it now, we're in 2023, those rules came in 2015. Prior to that, you didn't need an inland revenue number at all to transact property in New Zealand. It just absolutely seems insane. So what happened is those rules came in, they were called the Bright Line rules. They came in 3 parts, IRD numbers for all transactions, a 2-year period where if you bought and sold within that period, apart from some really minor exclusions, you paid tax regardless of intention. And the third bit, which was quite clever, was resident land withholding tax. So that was a tax on transactions that had occurred during a Bright Line period by an offshore person. And what happened is it pretty much took 10% of the sale price on settlement. And then that person had the obligation to file a return to get that tax back or wash out the correct amount of tax, because obviously 10% of the sale price is quite a lot of money, and often the tax wouldn't be that high. So those rules actually at that stage did what they were meant to do. A Bright Line test is just that. It's a line in the sand. So it was 1 year, 364 days, you pay tax. 2 years, 1 day, you don't pay tax. And then after that, you're back into the old intention-based regime, which is something that people do get a bit confused with. Because the Bright Line rules only apply over the top of that intention-based regime. So that was all working really well. And then Winston Peters put Labor into power. So what happened is probably what felt like a pretty long period of what I like to call landlord bashing. So the government pretty much used landlords as a scapegoat for fundamental supply and demand issues that were occurring in the property market. And they were actually mostly supply-based. Anyone here who's tried to do anything in the property space will know that dealing with the council is a nightmare. It costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. Materials costs are constantly rising. The rules and regulations around contractors and that sort of stuff is quite difficult. So there was a huge amount of red tape in the property market, along with low interest rates, which were pushing the property prices up in New Zealand, substantially year on year. And the government had to be seen to do something. So what they did is they changed the Bright Line rules to 5 years. So I thought that was a bit pointless. When you look at an intention-based regime, your intention's either you trade or you buy and hold. So trading is something that's done over the short term. It's more akin to a business. It's more active. In that scenario, you pay income tax and you pay GST. If you're a buy and hold investor, then ordinarily you are meant to be holding on for capital growth over the long term. And 2 years was long enough to stop short-term intentions, but not so long that if you needed to sell for any reason, so due high interest rates at the moment, lots of people are locked into bright line periods where they would possibly sell down one of their properties to balance their portfolio, but they have to pay a tax on what is essentially a long-term capital asset. So either way, 5 years came in, and also the government brought in a foreign buyers ban. And there was a huge amount of media around this and a huge misconception that foreigners were buying all New Zealand's properties. It didn't apply to Australians or Singaporeans, but it was a pretty narrow set of rules and they kept making it narrower. So they were basically trying to stop offshore people buying in an easy way. What happened, of course, is that it did nothing. The market rocketed on because those offshore buyers weren't actually offshore buyers, they were New Zealand citizens who might have looked like offshore buyers. The whole thing was a bit optically not very good, I don't think, for New Zealand. But nevertheless, it went in. Nothing happened. So this was all going along, property markets going along. And behind that, we had a heap of other regulatory changes, which isn't necessarily tax-based, but for example, letting fees were removed. So letting fees are obviously the fee that the potential tenant would have paid to the property broker or what do you call them, property manager to let the property. And that basically covered the time they had to open up the property to show people and the fees and administration. So that was taken away by the government. What that meant is that those costs fell onto landlords. We also had healthy homes enacted. So a lot of you here would know what that meant, but long story short, you had to install heat pumps and insulation up to a certain standard. So a good thing, but it is something that cost a lot of landlords additional money whilst they were still trying to obviously make a return from their property. So those things happened, and then quite out of the blue, the government in 2021 announced that they would be removing interest deductibility from investment properties. And this was a shock. There wouldn't have been very many people in the accounting and tax community actually saw this one coming. I actually remember talking to a developer friend of mine the morning before the announcement, and we were just saying that we didn't expect much to be in there. And anyway, that came out, and pretty much overnight, what it did is it created a two-tier tax system. So tax systems are meant to be horizontally and vertically equitable, which is just a fancy way of saying that they treat two people in the same situation the same way, and two people in different situations differently. It's about fairness, and that's how good tax systems are meant to be built. But so now suddenly we had two people who are in the same position. So they're both property investors. If they are a property investor and they buy a new build property, so that was a property with a co-compliance issue in 2020 or onwards, they were allowed to claim interest deductions. If I was a property investor who bought an in situ property, so that was a non-new build property, then I wasn't able to claim interest deduction. So what this did is this actually changed the cash flow profile of a property from a tax perspective hugely. Before, if I had that in situ property, I made $30,000 of rent and I had $25,000 of interest, and I would have had $5,000 of net income and paid tax. Suddenly, I had $30,000 of net income, but I still had to pay that interest, and I had a tax bill of about $7K to go with it. So hugely unfair, put pressure on a group of people who, for lack of a better way of putting it, are providing accommodation in this country at a far cheaper rate than the government. And you don't have to go very far every week in papers to see how much money the government is spending on accommodation. So it was a bit of a blow. And what it did do is it changed the new build market pretty quickly. So new builds were traditionally the domain of unsophisticated investors, so people who just were trying to build an asset for retirement but hadn't really learned how to add value, didn't really understand probably fully the wealth creation cycle in property, but they just wanted to do something, or they were for first home buyers. And what we saw for that, actually the first sort of 8 to 10 months after that happened is that the new builds were rocking out the door. So the property market was still pretty buoyant. Interest rates hadn't started their meteoric rise. And in short, the new builds were just selling out from every developer. And it was funny, they would get a stack of 10 contracts on a new build, and the first home buyer was right at the bottom, no chance. So it actually disenfranchised the people that it was meant to help, because you remember the narrative around property markets being too high is that the first home buyer, the first home buyer, the first home buyer. The reality is, I think, with property is that if the government wanted to make it cheaper, they could easily remove GST, for example, which all developers pay when they build properties. And more than that, if you really look closely at those rules and you look at some of the exemptions, so there's an exemption there that's, I think some of our clients, maybe some here actually have used, is if you rent your property to a social housing provider, you can still claim interest. And I think that really, for me, just really solidified what was going on. The government really knew that they had a supply issue, and that they were spending a lot of money on accommodation. They needed to whack landlords and be seen to be doing the right thing, but they just whacked the wrong side. So they keep hitting the demand side when actually they need to be going to do work on the supply side, so consenting, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, there's been lots of talks about consenting changes, and there has been unitary plan changes, especially in Auckland, which have made it easier. But in short, it's still a huge amount of red tape. If you're doing a development, you've got a building consent and a resource consent process that can take up to 8 months to get through. Usually comes with $50,000 or $60,000 of council contributions and about $60,000 of planner or architect fees. So before you even start building, you're 130 grand plus 8 months in the red. So it just goes to show that what was happening. So all this was happening, and so interest deduction has been slowly being phased out for people already owned in situ properties. We're currently at 50%, and the demand obviously for in situ properties had dropped significantly. New builds had pretty much sold out nationwide. And then the market started to turn. So property markets run in cycles, just like all economic markets. We had prior to this the largest property boom that New Zealand's ever seen. Second largest was 2011 after the GFC. And it actually had got a little bit ridiculous if you looked at it objectively. Annualized growth rates had shot up well over 11% when 6% is what most people plan on. And there were places in New Zealand where prices going up 20% a year or more. So it got a little bit unsustainable. This was all driven by the money printing that happened after COVID. This isn't an economics lesson, but in short, when governments run into problems like this, they have a few levers they can pull. One is austerity measures, so spend less. Labor government didn't know how to do that very well. They like to do the opposite, from all I could tell. You have taxation, which is another lever that's commonly pulled, and obviously they did pull a bit in the tax space. And then the final bit you have is quantitative easing, which is just a fancy way of saying printing money or putting money into the economy. So they did this, and they did this at record rates. It was the most quantitative easing New Zealand ever seen, and the whole world did it. So it wasn't a New Zealand problem. Can't blame the Labor government for this one. Can possibly blame them for how they spent it, but definitely can't blame them for the quantitative easing, because it's pretty much what all governments decided to do. So it was an interesting time, COVID, because everyone immediately thought the property market was going to collapse. Everyone thought businesses were going to collapse. And what happened was the absolute complete opposite. Businesses were thriving. The property market was thriving. Property prices boomed. Interest rates were really low, which basically meant there was an abundance of credit. So credit was easily available and it was cheap. So fast forward to about 18 months ago, and the wheels started to fall off for most worldwide economies, New Zealand included, and interest rates started to rise. And I think at that stage, most of us were looking at it going, oh yeah, of course they're going to go up. Everyone knew they weren't going to stay at 2.5%. But I don't think most people expected them to get as high as they have got. And when you go from 2.5% to nearly 7% in a lot of cases, that is a huge jump in mortgage payments on one property. Huge jump. If you're 2 or 3 properties, absolutely huge jump. So it took a while to start flowing through into the market, and that's because when they do this, people on fixed rates that don't roll over for 12 months, varying other reasons why it takes time to get into people's pockets, but it finally got into people's pockets and property prices started to fall. We'll watch that, and again, I think most of us thought, okay, yeah, they've got to come back. This is they are unsustainable, but the rate that they came down, I don't think people expected. So we're down about 20% now nationwide, which is a huge amount. But if you do the math over the last 5 years prior to that, most people are still well up. So we now have this thing that I call silent depression, which is a financial thing where you expected the world to end and didn't, but you're still left in a situation which isn't so palatable. So your asset value is down and the cost of owning that asset is way up and doesn't seem to be easing. And you get it, not just property owners get it, people get it in their jobs. For example, if you look at pay rates over the last 3 years, what people getting paid is double. We now pay, everyone in the office earns about twice what they did about 3 years ago. So they're earning more, but they're not any better off financially. So fast forward to now, what we've had is we haven't had as many developments getting built. So property developers pretty much dropped off the face of the earth, or the ones that were developing retrenched. So they built the stock that they had on the books, and they didn't buy any land. So we've now had a national government, and so they've promised some things which I think we're going to start to see flow into the property market in the next 12 months. Together with the fact that we haven't built enough houses. So if you follow the news, and I don't follow it closely, but I follow it enough to pick up what's going on, immigration into New Zealand is net positive and growing. So we're getting more people into the country. Those people are going to need houses. We have always pretty much had an undersupply of housing in New Zealand for the last 30 odd years. So that means that we do not build enough houses for our population growth, which is one of the reasons New Zealand has a very strong property market. The other reason is we're just obsessed with it. But what happened is migration is on the up. National government, the new Chris, so out with the old Chris, in with the new Chris, he has promised to reinstate interest deductibility for property investors. Now, the way he's promised to reinstate it, I think it could have been a bit better, but he's basically said we will have full interest deductibility back by 2026. So what that means is that if we're still going through this phase out of interest deductibility, just when it's going to go, it's going to come back. And I think I know why he did this. I obviously don't know for real, but I think the reason probably is that the government books aren't very good. They have a lot of debt and a lot of obligations, and a really easy way to have a win on both sides of the fence is give property investors back what they deserve. If you run a business and you have a spend $1 to derive $1 of profit, you should be able to deduct it. So give them back what they deserve. Optically, that looks great, but also we need some money in the bank account. So let's phase that in over 3 years. So it's a win. I would like to see it come in a bit sooner, but it's better than it not coming back at all. The other thing that he has pledged to do is reduce Brightline back down to 2 years. So I think that's a pretty good result. Brightline is one of those awful things, is it catches the wrong people 90% of the time. Once you're outside 2 years, in my opinion, that you're no longer a short-term speculator. You're definitely in that longer term investment realm. And in cases like now, over this last year, I've had a lot of clients who've had to sell properties because the interest rate strain has been too high, and they end up paying taxes where they shouldn't have had to. So they're basically paying a capital gains tax in a country that doesn't have a capital gains tax. So it doesn't really work for me. So I think that's a really, really good thing. The other thing it allows you to do is move structures. So there can be quite common commercial reasons to change from individual ownership to a trust, for example, or company to a trust, or vice versa. that was really restrictive under Brightline. For many years, you couldn't do it at all without resetting Brightline. There is now rollover relief, which was a pretty piss poor attempt at the government of allowing you to change structures. The problem with it is that it was so narrow that you basically couldn't do it unless you just went in a really narrow set of circumstances. So I don't think Brightline is very well thought out rule. I think if I had my say and I was looking at it objectively over a long period of time, New Zealand should just have a capital gains tax and get on with it. That way, at least everyone knows the playing field, everyone knows the rules, and it's fair. And the Brightline issue where you get taxed where you really shouldn't will go away. And it happens so much. And there's just no wriggle room within that revenue. They're just so narrow, the exemptions, and they're very, very tough on it. And it's just got a bit stupid. So that one's going back to 2 years. I think it's really good. And the final thing that I thought was really clever is they are going to allow foreign buyers back into the country. I think the amount is 2 million that they spend if they buy. They can buy properties in New Zealand over 2 million. And they get that privilege, but to have that privilege, they have to pay a tax. So it probably feels similar to like stamp duty in Australia, where you pay a tax on a transaction. We don't know how it's going to happen, but I actually think that's really clever because, first of all, I don't think New Zealand should be a shut economy. I think we should be an open economy. Less government is better, and we, as a small country, need foreign money to keep moving forward. And we actually need higher immigration too, but we need foreign money. So I thought those were three really, really sensible policies from National, and they clearly won the hearts and the minds of property investors because even in my client base, obviously we've got a large amount of property investors, and not all of them voted National traditionally. A lot of people voted Labour in the last cycle. I've spoken to a lot of my clients about it, and they obviously didn't know that Labour was going to turn on property investors like it did. And a lot of those people switched back to Blue. And if you were in New Zealand, you watched the election night, watching all the red flip back to Blue was quite interesting. And Labour can't be blamed for everything. They went through a pretty tough period, and a lot of governments had problems, but I do think that they could have handled it a bit better. Anyway, so that brings us nicely here. So that was a good little story. Pretty much good little narrative on what's happened in the property market and why we've got to the point we have now. And so the point that we've got now, I think, is pretty much interest rates have stabilized. It's largely expected that they're not going to go up. Can't be guaranteed. I think the banks probably, there's somewhere along the line in New Zealand, there's going to be a banking commission. They look at the banks and go, what the hell has gone on here? Why are you still making billions of dollars of profits when your customers are actually suffering? But I don't think they're going to go up much longer. I don't know when they're going to go down, but my guess is probably mid to late next year we will start to see 0.25 come off the OCR. What will happen probably over the next 2 years is that interest rates will settle back down to where they should be, which is roughly 4.5 to 5%, which is traditionally where interest rates kind of settle over time. That, together with immigration continuing to grow, together with the fact that we have not built enough houses, and we've seen it now in my client base, developers are coming back. They're starting to buy land. They're starting to look at delivering projects, but those projects are going to be delivered 12 to 15 months from now. And pretty much I think that gives you the indication of the time frame that we've still got to go to get back to a nice, good, stable property market. What I do know, though, and a lot of people here will know, is that it doesn't always matter what the market's like. If you apply the fundamentals of good property investor, which is buy well, add value, and then manage it correctly, then you can actually continue to move forward in any market. The real caveat or problem with that, as most of you guys will know, is that just getting the lending even to do that has become very, very difficult. So my predictions are for an interest rate reduction in mid to late next year, and the property market to kick back into life by the end of next year. And I think when it does kick back into life, it's going to happen pretty quickly. Fundamentally, property as an asset class has not changed. bricks and mortar is still safe. It's still a great way to add value and grow your wealth over time. And people are always going to need accommodation, at least in this current modern world. So yeah, that's where I see it. Any questions? Predictions all my own. Not guaranteed.
That was awesome. Thanks, Matt. So if you've got any questions, feel free to throw them in into the chat. But my question is, what are you doing? You know, you said you're investing personally, you've done renovations, etc. So what are you doing personally at the moment?
Yeah, so what happened is that a lot of people might know I invest with my cousin AJ, who some of you would have worked with. What happened is we sat down about probably 14 months ago, about 4 months into the, what you could obviously see what was happening. We had to make some decisions. So we did a couple of things. We looked to protect our balance sheet. So basically, we were going to try get through the whatever time period it was, holding on to the most assets that we could retain. So we were traditionally buy and hold investors, buy, add value, revalue, go again. So we ended up selling some properties as what came out of that. We sold the best and the worst, and we banked that money and paid down a bit of debt. We then went around all the banks and we got onto as much interest-only periods as we could get, and we started to hold on. And then at the same time, we made a conscious decision to focus more on development. So we were already doing a couple of developments. So we thought, right, we're going to do a couple more. And so we took some of that money and we put it into developments and we pre-sold them and just started delivering them. So the reason being is the fundamentals of being a long-term buy and hold investor were just getting crushed by interest rates. And even now, we get together every Monday and go have a meeting about it and talk about the projects and stuff like that. But we're getting to the point now where all those interest-only periods that we negotiated and all those rates we negotiated have rolled off. And most of our book is on 6.5%. So the other part of doing developments is just to provide the cash flow to actually be able to keep paying the interest for the next sort of 12 months, 18 months. But I do think that for us, it was the right time. We've done a lot of buy and hold investing, and property investment is a journey. And it does start with that one property, and then you add value in that 2 and 3, and you go on. And as you climb the scales of complexity, often you will end up in small scale subdivisions. Some people obviously end up in large scale. For me, I think terraced housing, so 5-lot, under $1 million, 3-bed, 2-bath houses are probably the absolute sweet spot in New Zealand for doing a development. There's always going to be a buyer in that range. They suit investors, they suit first home buyers. They're relatively easy to build because you're building all 5 at once. Council understands them, easily consented. So I think what we will continue to do is develop property, but I will hopefully be looking to return to the buy and hold realm once the bank likes me again.
Well, speaking of bank liking you, obviously we had the mortgage broker yesterday and we're talking a little bit about those types of things. You work with a lot of businesses as well. We've got a lot of self-employed people here. What are some things they can be doing from an accounting perspective to get their books in order to make them look better for banks? Do banks typically look at profit or revenue or cash flow or what you're taking personally, those types of things?
Yeah, I think all of those things are actually important. I think the primary thing, though, with being self-employed is tidiness. What banks are automatically more nervous when they deal with a self-employed person. The good broker will know that some banks are better than others for self-employed, but in general, they are still nervous. So number one thing that banks like to see is clean bank statements, so keeping your business tidy. They like to see tax returns and financial statements up to date. They do not like to see overdrafts, direct debits bouncing, and or large tax payments or tax arrangement payments. All those things are sort of red flags for the bank, and they do make it a huge amount harder. So if we do have self-employed people, and sometimes they do have untidy banking history, we actually send them away for 3 months and get them to tidy it up. Next thing, obviously, is profit. The more money you make, the more the bank's going to like you. Pretty simple. When banks lend, they lend on equity and cash flow. Some banks, like second tiers or third tiers, will drop one of those out. But in effect, they are trying to see that you can afford the lending that you're getting. And test rates, I actually don't know what the current test rate is. The old test rate used to be around 7%. So if they lent you at 3%, they actually tested your income, stress tested it to pay twice as much as you were getting the loan for. And actually, we all used to think 7% was hilarious. Why were they testing it so high? But look, we were wrong, weren't we? So I don't know what the test. Imagine what the test rate is now. I doubt it's 14%. The banks probably know it's not going to double again. But I think the more income that you make, the better off you're going to be. So tidy books. Obviously, within that is claim all the things that you can. One of the great things about being self-employed versus an employees don't get to claim nearly anything. All you can claim as an employee is loss of earnings, insurance, accounting fees, and interest on money borrowed to invest. As a self-employed person, you can claim anything that has a connection with your income and earning process. And in a lot of cases, self-employed people can blur that line a little bit. Cell phones are in, entertainment might be in some form, home office expenses, some motor vehicle travel sometimes. Those are things that are completely excluded for a PAYE employee, and effectively that means that every dollar that you earn as a self-employed person has a higher value than someone who is just on PAYE. So I think it is a good position to start from, but you've just got to understand the bank's going to be wary of you. They love the PAYE earner. Pay slips are consistent, the job is secure. When the reality is that no one's job's actually secure. But that's just optics.
Makes me laugh. I can tell you, I'll be here longer than any other team. I'll be the last one I let go if Wealth Mentor was ever in trouble.
Yeah, that's your
Tim starting
obligation.
to sweat. I'm sure your business is exactly the same.
Yeah, look, and it's for business owners. I know this isn't a business owners conference, but people, if you have been in business, it's actually been the hardest period anyone can remember. Salaries have doubled. The cost of everything that we do has doubled. Rent's about the only thing that actually hasn't gone up significantly, but all the softwares we use, right down to like the milk in the fridge for people's teas and coffees, everything has doubled. And it's quite hard in a business when most businesses run 20% net profit margin. So that means if they turn over 100 grand, they only keep 20 grand of it. And good businesses run a bit higher. I like to see businesses at 30% or more if I can. But long story short, if you're running a 20% margin, all your costs double overnight. You're running a 10% margin. Put in accounts receivable days on top. So businesses in New Zealand are notoriously bad at paying each other. So the rule of thumb basically is you lose another third on receivables over time in your cash flow cycle. So these guys are running down to like 7%. Suddenly something happens, or their personal interest rates have gone up, their drawings need to come out, suddenly they don't have the money. And so a lot of people are probably quite slow to adjust for a couple of reasons. Obviously, no one likes putting their prices up because you get the inevitable kickback, which is fair. But also there's quite a lot of administration involved. If you're a service provider, for example, you pretty much have to go tell everyone. Then you have to go change all their APs. You have to do lots of stuff. So I think businesses work quite slow. I think that's another piece of work I expect to see over the next few years. So I definitely expect there to be some sort of banking review. New Zealand's banking is just insane what they get away with. The other thing I think will be some sort of legislation mandating payables between small businesses. I know Xero, this accounting software, they've done lots of research and it's absolutely terrible. So I expect there to be something. I don't know how they do that, but I definitely think there's some legislation they could put in to mandate payment in certain days or something. But anyway, off topic.
No problem. We'll actually wrap it up there anyway. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. I think everyone's aware, how to get in touch with you, and thanks for what you do in supporting the community.
Yeah, no worries. I honestly love coming on and doing this stuff. I probably would have been a bit happier if we won this morning, but hey, life goes on.
It does. It
It
does.
does.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Good to see you.